This video is sponsored by Dubby Jitterless Energy Blend. Click on the link in the description and use the code PackerMan to save 10% on any order. April the 26th and 27th, 1991. These are the 2 days in tornado history that spawned what is known as the Great Plains Tornado Outbreak, or more commonly known as the Andover Tornado Outbreak, because of a particularly devastating F5 tornado that struck Andover, Kansas. And there were also several other tornadoes from this particular outbreak that were pretty notorious and gained notoriety for a variety of reasons, including one that caused a misconception that overpasses can provide adequate shelter during a tornado. This is going to be the first episode of Tornado Tales where I am not going to be focusing on one particular tornado for once, like I've done the previous couple of episodes. In this case, we're going to be focusing on 3 separate tornadoes in a single outbreak, because they have all had a major impact in more ways than one. So let's get into it. This is Tornado Tales.
Oh, that is scary. The truck is, oh my gosh. Holy smokes.
What's happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to today's edition of Tornado Tales, where today we're going to be talking about the 1991 Great Plains Tornado Outbreak, or as it's more commonly referred to, the Andover Tornado Outbreak. The reason why I wanted to cover this particular outbreak is because this is the outbreak that actually got me interested in tornadoes as a kid, believe it or not. I remember as a little guy watching TV one day when they showed the now famous footage of several tornadoes from this particular outbreak, including the F5 tornado that struck Andover, Kansas, and of course the F2 tornado that chased a news team down the Kansas turnpike, and how that one became infamous during the 90s. And there was also a third tornado that actually gained some notoriety because there was a mobile radar that clocked its wind speeds at F5 strength, believe it or not. So we're going to be covering all of that in this episode here today, so fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be a wild ride. So this tornado outbreak took place mainly in the states of Oklahoma and Kansas, although some of the devastating tornadoes actually took place in Kansas, including one of the tornadoes that we'll be talking about today. A total of 55 tornadoes were confirmed during these 2 days, with the max rating of an F5, a total of 21 fatalities, 313 injuries, and almost $600 million in damage in 1991 currency. However, of these 55 tornadoes, there were 3 in particular that gained notoriety in 3 completely different ways. The first of which was what is now known as the Red Rock tornado. A discrete storm produced a tornado at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, which would reach F4 intensity and would become a long track tornado, tracking for 66 miles and would reach a maximum width of 1,500 yards. So this thing was damn near a mile wide. The tornado began 2.5 miles east of Garber and continued south of Billings. In this area, it reached F3 intensity, snapping power poles, toppling well pumps, demolishing a house, and destroying oil tanks. As it neared Interstate 35 and crossed over into Noble County, the tornado first reached F4 intensity, flattening a house and debarking many trees. In neighboring Osage County, 2 farms were destroyed before the tornado continued into Osage County. There, it passed west of Pawhuska, I believe that's how you pronounce that, toppling an oil rig with an 18-inch foundation. It lifted west-northwest of that city. Along the tornado's path across sparsely populated areas, several county roads had portions of their asphalt stripped away. Now, what made this tornado particularly notorious was the fact that there was a University of Oklahoma chase team headed by Howard Bluestein utilizing mobile Doppler weather radar to analyze the tornado. And what he found was kind of shocking. The radar measured peak wind speeds of 270 to 280 miles per hour. And bear in mind, this is before the introduction of the enhanced Fujita scale. So if you go by the old Fujita scale, 270 to 280 mile per hour winds at the top of the tornado's funnel, that suggests that the tornado probably had F5 winds close to the ground. That's a scary thought, huh? And at the time, this represented the strongest winds ever measured by radar, including the first measurements of F5 intensity winds. Fortunately, despite this tornado's power, there were only 6 total injuries from this tornado, and there wasn't that much in the way of damage, only $500,000 in damage, despite the fact that the tornado lasted for almost an hour and a half, which is absolute insanity. Look at this kitty cat. So the second tornado that gained notoriety from this outbreak is what is known as the Kansas Turnpike Underpass Tornado. This tornado was only an F2 tornado, and it was also spawned from the parent supercell that had formed the Andover tornado just a little bit earlier before this one. This tornado was rated an F2, and it tracked for 21 miles across Butler and Chase counties in Kansas. It paralleled the Kansas Turnpike for many miles before eventually crossing the road south of Cassaday, tossing vehicles up to 75 yards away from the turnpike. Now here's where the tornado gained notoriety, and this was one of the first tornadoes that I ever watched, and the footage that I saw was, well, it's in tornado infamy to say the least, because there was video from a news television crew, a Kansas television crew, that was filming the tornadoes, in particular this one. Video from this crew shows a minivan several hundred yards down the turnpike being rolled multiple times with other vehicles such as a large semi-trailer truck overturned and severely damaged.
You gotta go, buddy.
Now imagine being in the driver's seat of that van and you hear your passenger tell you, "We gotta go, this thing's catching us." Wouldn't you just shit your pants in that situation, knowing that there was this powerful tornado that was roaring down the turnpike and was catching you despite the fact that you had your foot to the floor? Yeah, that would be a pretty scary thought. Eventually they did make it to the underpass, and there was actually a family that had taken cover under there as well.
The twister, though, was gaining on us, and we made it there just moments before it struck. Get up under the girders! Is that where we want to go? Yes! It was a tremendous rush. Flying debris everywhere. Some people look to me like they're all right, but they have scratches and bruises. Here comes another one. Hang on, Ted. I got you. Hang on. You're all right. Don't put your hand over him. A little break. You guys just about didn't make it.
Now, this created a misconception that underpasses were safe havens from tornadoes, when the fact of the matter is nothing could be further from the truth. Because what happens is these underpasses almost act like a wind tunnel for these tornadoes. And when the tornado passes through these underpasses, the wind speeds are actually increased as the wind is funneled through. And it makes the wind speeds even faster. Now, what worked in these people's favor, the news crew and this family's favor, was the fact that this particular underpass had steel girders that they could hang on to. And not only that, when you look at the camera footage, the tornado looks like it's heading directly at them, but then at the last second, from the cameraman's vantage point, the tornado makes a slight change in direction off to their left. And they just barely miss getting a direct hit from this tornado. And even though it was only rated an F2, this was still a pretty strong tornado, because in the background of the video, you can actually see vehicles being tossed around like toys. So even though this tornado was only rated an F2, this was still a powerful tornado. So they are extremely lucky that they didn't sustain a direct hit from this tornado, because it could have been really bad. And, you know, the consequences of this practice of taking cover under an underpass would actually be realized during the 1999 Bridge Creek tornado, what I dubbed the Super Twister, because there were several instances where that particular tornado crossed over underpasses where people were taking shelter, and in each of those occasions there was at least one fatality where they were sucked up by the tornado, and some even sustained severe injuries, including crippling injuries, gruesome injuries. So yeah, that should be an indicator that taking cover under an underpass during a tornado should be considered a last resort. The people that took cover underneath the Kansas Turnpike underpass, they were fortunate that there were steel girders that they could hang on to, and the fact that they didn't sustain a direct hit. So this tornado actually gained quite a bit of notoriety because of this fact. However, the tornado that became the most infamous from the Great Plains tornado outbreak was the one that struck Andover, Kansas, and several other locations as well. And it is a very, very well documented tornado. So, at 5:49 p.m. Central, the storm which would become the Wichita-Andover tornado began east of Clearwater. At 6:05 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a statement urging residents in Hayesville, Derby, and Mulvane to seek shelter. This was succeeded by a tornado warning 4 minutes later. Around 6:16 p.m., the intensifying tornado began to affect southeastern sections of Wichita and directly struck the town of Hayesville. Now bear in mind, this was also during the time, and I mentioned this during the previous episode, the Plainfield tornado. This was during a time when this outbreak actually occurred within a transition period for the National Weather Service, and proved the value of NEXT-RAD radars, which were utilized in Oklahoma to provide advanced warning to residents. And obviously it worked, because without these NEXT-RAD radars, the death toll probably would have been a lot higher than it was. When this tornado struck the town of Hayesville, it produced strong F2 to F3 damage, while growing to a width of about 220 yards and acquiring multi-vortex characteristics. So this was a sign that this tornado was really powerful. As I've said in the past, when a tornado starts acquiring these multiple vortices that are rotating around the core of the tornado, that is a sign that this is an extremely powerful tornado, and it's going to become a violent tornado in due time, which is exactly what this one did. The tornado crossed the Kansas Turnpike about half a mile south of the South Wichita interchange. In eastern Wichita, some well-built houses in the Greenwich Heights subdivision were completely leveled, indicative of strong F3 to F4 damage, and 4 people were killed at this location, unfortunately. And then, at 6:24 p.m. Central, the tornado struck the McConnell Air Force Base. And this is when you see that ever-famous footage that somebody on the base was actually capturing at that point as the tornado was coming through the McConnell Air Force Base. It is one of the most famous bits of footage in the history of tornado filming. And it was, I think, the first tornado that I ever saw on television as a kid, and it made me go, holy crap, this is some incredible stuff. And believe it or not, it actually, I actually had thoughts about becoming a meteorologist as a kid because of this tornado. What was even more interesting about this tornado, though, and I didn't know this until later, was the fact that it narrowly missed a lineup of 10 B-1B bombers, each worth $280 million. Each. Not all together, each. 10 of them. Which means that's what? Over $2 billion worth of bombers that were damn near struck by this tornado. And that's in 1991 dollars. Imagine how much them bombers would be worth in today's currency. And imagine what would have happened if that tornado would have destroyed them all. That would have been, ugh. And not only that, and this is the scariest part of it all, 2 of those 10 B-1B bombers were equipped with nuclear warheads. Yeah. Now imagine if one or both of them nuclear warheads had been damaged in this tornado. The thought of a radioactive tornado is pretty bone-chilling, to say the least. Thankfully, that did not come to pass. 9 major facilities on the base were destroyed, including the officers' club, the base hospital, the library, and the elementary school. In addition, 102 housing units were demolished. Thankfully, no fatalities were recorded there, although there were 16 people that were injured, and total losses reached $62 million. Imagine how high that total would have been if it would have destroyed those bombers. As the tornado continued to move toward U.S. Route 54 in Kansas in the direction of Andover, it prompted forecasters to issue a heightened tornado warning, alerting residents in Augusta and Andover that a damaging tornado was approaching, basically a tornado emergency. Despite this warning, the tornado sirens in Andover failed, which is not a good thing. However, at 6:31 p.m., knowing that the sirens were not working, the local police actually drove through the Golden Spur Mobile Home Park and through the town, warning residents to seek shelter. And I think it was because of those officers doing their job and warning people that, hey, there's a dangerous tornado approaching, which would eventually become an F5. I think their actions saved a lot of lives, because had they not warned the people in that mobile home park, and we all know how mobile homes do in tornadoes, if they hadn't warned them, the death toll probably would have been a lot higher, and that's for damn sure. 10 minutes later, the large wedge-shaped tornado entered South Andover and began to impact the mobile home park, which ultimately sustained a direct hit. Of the 244 manufactured homes, 205 were destroyed. Post-storm interviews by health officials found that 339 residents were home during the tornado, of which 146 evacuated, 149 sought refuge in the community center, or the community shelter, I should say, and 38 remained in their homes. No casualties occurred among individuals who fled or utilized the shelter. However, 13 people were killed, another 17 were hospitalized, and 9 sustained minor injuries among the group who remained in their structures. So obviously, leaving and evacuating was the way to go in this situation, because the majority of the people who were killed by this tornado were in the mobile home park. Additional homes were swept from their foundations to the west of this park, where the Andover tornado earned its F5 rating. Throughout the city, over 1,500 residences were devastated. The tornado continued northeast, affecting the outskirts of Towanda, and then finally, 20 minutes later, the tornado dissipated west of El Dorado and north of the Kansas Turnpike, although the parent supercell later produced additional tornadoes, including the F2 tornado that I mentioned earlier. Along the tornado's path, 84 frame houses and 14 businesses were leveled. 17 people died in this tornado, and 225 were injured. 1,728 buildings were destroyed, and there was over $300 million in damage. In addition, this was the final Kansas tornado to be given an F5 rating prior to the implementation of the enhanced Fujita scale. Believe it or not, Kansas is right smack dab in the middle of Tornado Alley, and yet this was the final tornado that hit Kansas to be rated an F5. Wrap your head around that shit. And then eventually though, they would be hit by another Force 5 tornado, which would end up being the Greensburg EF5 tornado on May the 4th, 2007, which actually happened to be the very first tornado to be given the EF5 rating. And that's certainly one that we will be covering in due time. And thus ends the story of the 1991 Andover tornado outbreak. Certainly an outbreak that certainly a huge influence on me in my younger years, becoming fascinated with tornadoes and what they're all about. And I still watch all kinds of tornado related stuff to this day, including stuff like Storm Stories or Real Time Tornado, which you can see on YouTube. I used to be a huge fan of Storm Chasers years ago when it was a regular thing on the Discovery Channel. I mean, there has been a lot of tornado related stuff that I have just been so interested in ever since I was a kid, and you know, now I got this show going on my YouTube channel. So needless to say, this was a prolific tornado outbreak, even though I obviously wasn't a part of it because I live in Central Ohio, and I was actually also living in Ohio at the time as well. But in terms of being fascinated and what's the word I'm looking for? Motivated, I guess. This outbreak in particular had a huge impact on me. So, but that is going to do it for today's edition of Tornado Tales. If you enjoyed watching this edition of Tornado Tales, I generally upload episodes about every 3 weeks. I do appreciate the amount of response I got from my video covering the 2013 Moore tornado. Response was absolutely incredible. The number of views, it's become the second most watched video, at least at the time that I'm recording this episode. It is the second most watched video on my channel and the most liked video on my channel thus far. So even though I'm still a small channel, I mean, that's still a big deal to me. So I definitely appreciate those that watched the video and gave it the love that it has so far. But there will be more episodes to come, obviously, and actually the next episode of Tornado Tales, we're going to be taking our first look into one of the most prolific tornado outbreaks in recorded history, the 1974 super outbreak. Yep, that's going to be our first one, diving into that one. And that I could create a whole series based on the tornadoes from that outbreak. Good Lord. Like, that outbreak was just insanity. But we'll get into that next time. So, thank you very much for watching this edition of Tornado Tales. And until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out. See you later. What's happening, ladies and germs? Thank you for watching tonight's video. If you're interested in sponsoring the channel, there is a link to my Patreon down in the description box below. Otherwise, hit like and subscribe if you want to continue watching great content like you saw today. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out.